The night was so dark, it was as if the sky exerted all its dark power to cover the moon and stars. The silence of the night was broken by the sound of the wind howling between the trees, creating a sinister melody that echoed around the old house that was on the edge of the village. Inside the house, Sarah awoke suddenly, feeling an invisible yet very real presence. The wall clock shows 3 a.m., a time often touted as the most haunted time of the night. A strange coldness crept into his bones, making his body tremble. Sarah felt something was wrong. He tried to convince himself that everything was fine, but his heart knew something was wrong. The strange sound that woke him up was now heard again. This time, clearer and closer, like someone calling her name softly.
Sarah.
Those words sounded like the whispers of the wind, but Sarah knew very well it wasn't the sound of the wind. His heart was racing, trying to beat the fear that had begun to ambush. He got out of bed, strengthened himself and walked to the window. His heavy footsteps made the old wooden floor creak, creating a terrible noise in the silence of the night. Sarah opened the window curtain slowly, peering out, but only pitch darkness greeted her. There was no moon, no stars, only a dark shadow that seemed to envelop the outside world. Suddenly, the voice sounded again, louder and clearer. The sound came from the direction of the forest surrounding his house.
Sarah,
called out the voice again, making her fur bristle. Sarah swallowed, trying to stay calm. He tried to convince himself that it was just his imagination at play, but his heart knew that this was more than an illusion. Irrepressible curiosity overcame his fear. With trembling hands, Sarah took the jacket hanging behind the door and walked out of the room. The cold night air instantly ambushed his body as soon as he opened the front door. Sarah stepped out, carefully closing the door behind her. He stood for a moment on the porch, listening carefully. The sound of a howling wind and the rustle of leaves create an eerie background. Sarah tried to sharpen her hearing, looking for the origin of the voice calling her name. Sarah began to walk slowly, trying not to make sounds that could attract attention. His every step felt like an echo amidst the silence. The path to the forest looked even more sinister under the darkness of the night. When he entered the forest, the shadows of the trees looked like living creatures that were stalking him. The fear grew more and more intense, but he kept going, guided by an irresistible curiosity. In the distance, Sarah saw the shadow of a person standing among the trees. His heart was racing, but he had the courage to ask, "Who's there?" His voice sounded trembling and full of fear. There was no answer, only the silence grew more tense. The shadow remained silent, as if waiting for him to approach. Sarah stepped forward. Her every step was heavy like walking in a nightmare. The shadow began to move, away from Sarah. He quickened his pace, trying to catch up. However, every time he approached, the shadow always moved further, as if leading him into the depths of the forest. His heart was pounding, fear and curiosity mixed into one. Suddenly, the shadow stopped at a small clearing in the middle of the forest and simply disappeared, leaving Sarah alone. Sarah paused, trying to understand what had just happened, in the middle of clearing. He saw a mound of earth that looked like it had just been dug up. His heart beat faster and faster, feeling that there was something terrible behind that mound of earth. On top of the mound, there was an old, scary-looking doll with torn eyes and dirty rags. The foul smell coming from the ground made Sarah want to vomit. Fear haunted him even more, but he could not look away. Sarah took a few steps back, trying to gather her courage. However, before he could think any further, he felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. Sarah turned quickly, and in front of her stood an old woman with a pale face and empty eyes.
You have to go,
the woman said in an almost inaudible voice. Sarah wanted to run, but her legs felt stiff, as if they were being held back by an invisible force. The old woman slowly disappeared into a mist, leaving behind a foul smell that pierced her nose. Sarah fell to her knees, trying to calm herself down. When he felt strong enough to stand up again, he decided to return home as soon as possible. Sarah is running through the jungle. Fear and adrenaline make her run faster than ever. Arriving home, he locked the door and closed all the windows. However, the feeling of security did not come. Inside the house, he heard increasingly loud whispers, a voice calling his name in a terrible tone. Dark shadows seemed to move around the corners of the room, making him feel trapped in a real nightmare. When Sarah tries to turn on the light, the electricity suddenly goes out, leaving the house in complete darkness. He fumbled for candles and matches. When the candle burns, the shadow that was originally faint is now clear. The figure of the old woman he had seen in the forest was now standing in the corner of the room, looking at him with empty eyes. The old woman began to speak. Her voice was like the sighs of the night wind.
You found my grave. I can't leave until I truth found.
Sarah trembled, not understanding what to do. What do you want from me? He asked in a desperate voice. The woman told the story in a slightly hissing and faint voice, but Sarah could still clearly hear every word that came out of her mouth. In the 17th century, in a small village called Salem, rumors spread about a woman named Abigail Mortimer. Abigail is a young widow who lives alone on the edge of the forest. His striking appearance, with jet black hair and piercing blue eyes, often alerted the villagers. He is known as a healer with a deep knowledge of herbs and potions, but to many, his skills more resemble black magic. Abigail can often be seen wandering through the forest at night, collecting plants and mushrooms unknown to the villagers. He formulated various drugs that can cure even the most difficult diseases. However, this ability even aroused suspicion in the hearts of conservative villagers. They begin to talk about Abigail having supernatural powers gained from her fellowship with the devil. The village has long been plagued by fear of witches. When a series of natural disasters and mysterious deaths hit the village, fingers immediately pointed towards Abigail. The harvest season failed, the cattle died without cause, and several young children fell ill and died. The frantic villagers are looking for a scapegoat, and the isolated Abigail becomes an easy target. The village priests incited this fear, claiming that Abigail was the cause of all the misfortunes that were happening. One day, the village chief's daughter, Anna, fell ill. All traditional medicine failed to cure it. In desperation, the village chief came to Abigail and begged for her help. Abigail agrees to help, and with a special potion she makes, Anna is cured overnight. However, Abigail's success did not necessarily erase the suspicions of the population. On the contrary, it strengthened their belief that Abigail had supernatural powers. Rumors spread, and finally, an angry mob gathered in front of Abigail's house, carrying torches and sharp weapons. They accused her of being the witch who caused all their suffering. Abigail tries to defend herself, but her voice is drowned out by the cries of an angry mob. They dragged him out of his house, where he tried to defend himself in vain. Her screams echoed through the trees, but no one was sympathetic. Without trial, they dragged him into the middle of the forest, in a place considered cursed. There, under the faint light of the full moon, they decided to end it. Quickly, they dug a hole and buried Abigail alive, while her voice full of curses sounded low.
I'll be back. I will take revenge. You will all feel the pain you inflicted on me.
So did Abigail's curse before the ground covered her entire body. After that event, the village began to experience a series of strange events. Crops wither, livestock mysteriously die, and some residents begin to have terrible nightmares about Abigail returning from the dead. The people involved in his execution were found dead one by one with faces filled with fear. Every night, the sound of crying and moaning is heard from the direction of the forest. People who tried to approach the place where Abigail was buried would feel a bone-chilling chill and hear eerie whispers. One of the residents most involved in Abigail's capture was Samuel, a headstrong farmer. Samuel was one of the most vocal in accusing Abigail of being a witch, and was zealous in digging her grave pit. One night, Samuel heard a knock on his door. When he opened it, there was no one. However, he felt a strange cold air and the smell of wet earth. That night, Samuel could not sleep, awakened by shadows and strange sounds. The next morning, he was found dead with an incredible expression of fear on his face. Another resident, Martha, an elderly woman who also believes Abigail is a witch, begins to experience strange visions. He saw Abigail's reflection in the mirror and heard her voice at night. Martha tried to ignore this, but the sight and sound intensified. Eventually, Martha is found hanging in her home, leaving a note saying that Abigail is haunting her. The village chief, who felt responsible for Abigail's death, tried to appease the inhabitants with religious rituals and prayed for forgiveness. However, nothing can stop the terror spreading in the village. He himself began to see Abigail in his dreams, reminding of the sins he had committed. One night, the remaining villagers gathered in the church, trying to find shelter. Suddenly, the sound of a strong wind and screams were heard from outside. The door of the church opened by itself, and a dark shadow entered. Residents screamed in fear, some fainted, while others tried to escape. It was the last night for many of them. The village is now abandoned, considered cursed forever. Those who dared to approach the forest at night claimed to hear the gentle voice of a crying woman and the sound of excavated earth. After hearing the story from the shadow of the woman made Sarah silent without moving without words. There was sadness and anger mixed together in his head. For a moment the atmosphere became quiet. Then the shadow moved a little closer to Sarah. Sarah's fear could not be hidden.
Do you know who was buried alive?
Asked the shadow of the mysterious woman. Sarah remained silent, unable to say, only being able to shake her head signifying she didn't know.
That's me.
The woman's voice was so scary. The question that had been hanging for so long had been answered, about the stories of his paranormal friends who had investigated the story of the Salem village. The sadness that Sarah suffered again spread when she remembered Sarah's lover named James, who never returned from the paranormal research group. Sarah only feels that the investigation has added a sad new mystery to her life. Several years ago, Sarah's friends made up of a group of paranormal researchers interested in the story of the cursed village of Salem and decided to visit the place. They bring advanced equipment to detect supernatural activity and hope to uncover the truth behind the legend of Abigail Mortimer. On the first night they arrived, they set up camp at the edge of the forest and began installing equipment. They don't have to wait long before strange things start happening. Their cameras captured fast-moving shadows among the trees, and audio recordings recorded inexplicable sounds of crying and whispering. One of the researchers felt a cold touch on his shoulder and heard a female voice calling his name. That night, they decide to venture deeper into the forest, towards the location where Abigail is buried. They found signs of excavation marks and felt a bone-chilling cold. One of the researchers, Mark, tried to communicate with Abigail using an electromagnetic field detection device. Suddenly, the device showed very high activity, and a soft but frightening sound was heard.
Why did you come?
The research team began to feel frightened, but they decided to continue the investigation anyway. They set up tents near the site and tried to sleep, although the atmosphere was very tense. At midnight, they are awakened by strange noises and vibrations on the ground. When they came out of the tent, they saw a faint shadow of a woman standing among the trees, looking at them with empty eyes. That night was a nightmare for them. One of the researchers, James, disappeared without a trace. They searched all night, but found only footprints leading into the dark forest. When morning came, they decided to leave the place, feeling it too dangerous to continue. However, before they leave, Mark feels compelled to make an offering to Abigail as a mark of respect. He placed a flower on the former mound and prayed for Abigail's spirit to calm down. When they left the forest, they felt that the cold was slowly disappearing, and the strange sounds subsided. Upon returning, they examined the recordings and found a lot of visual and audio evidence of supernatural activity. Their stories of experiences in the Salem forest spread and attracted the attention of more and more people interested in the paranormal. However, no one dared to return there for a long time. Salem Village remains a place haunted by dark memories. The remaining villagers moved elsewhere, leaving their homes now engulfed by the forest. Only a few adventurers and researchers dared to approach that forest, and they always did so with care and respect. Sarah felt she had to do something to end this curse. With the remaining courage, he returned to the forest carrying digging tools. When he got to the grave, the old woman was already waiting for him.
Dig here,
the woman said, pointing to the ground. Sarah dug quickly, her hands trembling and sweat pouring out. After a while, he found an old coffin. Inside, there are bones that have been rotting for a long time. Sarah took the bones and brought them back home. He felt there was something to be done there. Arriving home, Sarah prepared a simple funeral ritual. He lit a candle, read a prayer, and burned some incense. As the incense smoke began to rise, the old woman's figure reappeared, but this time with a calm smile on her face.
Thank you,
the woman said before disappearing forever. Sarah felt a heavy burden on her shoulders finally lifted. However, the calm lasted only a short time. When Sarah looked in the mirror, she saw the old woman's reflection behind her, still staring with empty eyes. Sarah realized that although the old woman's spirit had calmed down, the curse of the house had not disappeared. Every night, he hears strange sounds, sees moving shadows, and feels an invisible presence. The house seemed to live with an evil force that could not be controlled. When Sarah tried to leave the house, the doors locked by themselves, the windows were tightly closed. As if the house did not want to let him go, Sarah is trapped in an endless nightmare, where every night is a struggle to stay sane.